Loading your 41 Colt should be as straightforward as loading any other caliber. Those of you not familiar with hand loading should do so before trying what we're about to show you. Here are our beautiful hollow base bullets we cast in the last session of the video. Make sure you have a supply of brass, preferably from one lot. Starline offers high quality brass, which we're using for our run, especially if you consider how much bell we're going to have to give our case mouths. With the constant expanding and contraction of those mouths, that's the one place that they tend to fail first. Primers are Wolf small pistol. We chose Wolf because they tend to have the hardest primer cup of all primer types. They're less likely to pierce a primer, especially with the heavy leaf springs in these old Colts. But whatever you have on hand may work well. I like a Hornady inline priming tool, as you can really feel the primers bottoming out. I've gone through 3 or 4 of those Lee priming tools that are mostly made with pot metal. Redding was the die maker we chose to use for this one, since they were the only ones I could find at the time in stock. 3 die set is what you're going to need: a decapper, case mouth expander, and bullet seeder / roll crimper. The 41 Colt set came with a bullet seeder, which was basically a hollow tube and caused lines to be pressed into the bullet's ogive while seating. So being that I had a 40 caliber Redding set, I swapped out the seeder die and used the 40 caliber version with the bullet support to help in seating. First, you want to prime your cases. Usually I do this by hand and like to feel the primers sit snug on the bottom. Different primers seat differently. For instance, Wolf's are a bit tighter, while Remington go in too loose for my liking in some cases, especially if you use different brass head stamps for your pistol loadings. Primers should seat slightly below the head case. Otherwise, any protrusion will bind the revolver, making your day at the range a short one. Next, you want to adjust your belling die so that you get a nice opening which the bullet will slide into without binding. The bullet should be able to stay in the mouth on its own accord, with some light pressure. This is where the high quality cases come into play. If you have brass which cracks, it usually happens at the mouth from case hardening after a few reloads. Adjust and check. Remember, you do not want any lead shaving when you seat your bullets. That would not be good for accuracy. Plus, we went through all that work of casting our bullets. Why do you want to deform them? Now it's time to seat our bullets. Install your seeder die and make the necessary adjustments. The density and size of Unique fit well into the larger black powder cases, so they just decided to make it into a smokeless powder. We need the powder to be fast enough and to build up enough pressure to be able to expand the hollow base of the bullet to grip the sides of the barrel so we can get some form of accuracy. The IPP powder you see here is formulated to mimic Unique and is an industry canister powder I picked up some years ago. Many factory loaded handgun rounds from all manufacturers are loading using this generic substitute. They use the powder to load everything from 25 caliber up to 44 specials, 44 mags, and even 45 ACP. This time we're forced to use real black powder since our Colt is dated 1898 and the smokeless powder proof is not stamped on the left side of the trigger guard. The VP mark means verified proof and lets you know this gun was manufactured with different steel suitable for the higher pressures of smokeless powder. Remember, when in doubt about whether a gun can be fired with smokeless or black powder, ask a trained gunsmith. Even if they're unsure and you can't find out the answer, contact Colt, they'll give you more info. Otherwise, I tend to err on the side of caution and use black powder. It's more fun and realistic, for me anyway. Triple F is the chosen granular size, and I find Swiss to be smaller and burn a bit faster than GoX, which is larger in size. I like to make my own powder throwers using spent cases and wire. That way in the field you know exactly what your measurements are without having to lug your spout around. Plus they're free. And brass is everywhere. For a time like this that you don't have a predetermined size already made, just use your scale and measure out to 20 grains. Find your lead dipper that matches for fast loading. You do have a set of lead dippers, don't you? Remember our prior video on using these things? You don't? I highly advise you check it out. If you have an old-fashioned measuring device, such as this one, Use that. Then use a lead dipper, which will give you the same powder charge. The measuring devices seem to have a larger mouth, which doesn't aid in charging your cases. After charging, do a slight tapping of the brass on your bench. It aids in settling the powder and in bullet seating when the time comes. Now place your bullets in their mouth and get to work. Use your standard case tray so you don't make a mess knocking things over, as I have a tendency to do. Don't be too concerned about exact measurements here. Remember, black powder is more forgiving than smokeless, and an extra grain or two will not hurt anything. Pressures with black powder are very mild compared to smokeless, which is why the old steel could handle it. Even mild charges of smokeless can destroy an older gun after repeated firings, while black powder's gentle push will do little harm, usually. But remember, these are all guidelines. Your experience may vary. Next, you want to lube the bottom two grooves on the bullet. The top groove is the crimp groove and should not have any lube. I find it's easier to lube the bullets when they're in the case like this. Here we're using a mutton tallow beeswax mix, 50-50. This aids in keeping the fouling soft in the barrel while providing adequate lubrication. You can use any non-petroleum based lube, Crisco, olive oil, some guys even use paraffin wax. Petroleum-based lubes tend not to play too well with black powder, creating a nasty black sticky fouling substance, hard to clean from your original Colts. Remember, when you're loading these guys up, you do not want any airspace between the bottom of your bullet and your powder charge. You're better to compress your bullet on top of your powder charge of black powder than not. This is not like smokeless powder. Smokeless powder compression usually runs the pressures very high and very dangerous. With black powder, if you don't compress it, is when you have to worry. Seat your bullets slowly. With this charge, there's going to be some compression, which is what we want for safety. Go slow. I like to rotate my rounds sometimes to get an even seating. Now, remove your seater stem and crimp your rounds. Make sure you put just enough to make the roll crimp and not damage your bullet. I've seen bullets get over crimped that when you try to pop them out of the case, they crack in two. So remember, less is more here. I prefer to do this in two separate steps so there's no mashing of your projectile. As you go along in your process, remove the cylinder and use it to check bullet fit and crimp. They should drop right in without any pressure and slide back out. If not, go back and see what didn't work. Go back to each step, one by one. It might seem like a pain, but hey, you're hand loading. Using the cylinder as a chamber gauge is an old technique that can save lots of heartache at the range, especially after you load it up about 1,000 rounds. Wipe the excess lube off your rounds, and you're ready to go.